Hey guys, welcome back to my podcast. So today's going to be a little bit different than usual. This is going to be my first time hosting someone in my podcast. And so I just wanted to introduce here my friend Jean Christian. Christian, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Jean Christian. I am an entrepreneur. And then so yeah, I'm like very interested in being part of this podcast. And I want to thank Leslie for having me today.
Awesome. So me and Jean have actually known each other since college. Back when I was a freshman, he was a senior. And it wasn't until recently that I started posting stuff about my podcast that he sent me a message and he's like, wow, you look into that stuff too. And so we decided to do a collab together for that reason. So today we're going to be tackling two topics. It'll be an introductory, really, into Jeffrey Epstein as well as what's going on in Israel and Hamas. And so we're just going to be doing a more freestyle version of this. And this is just part one. Later on, we'll go into in more depth detail about this. So, yeah, why don't we go ahead and start off talking about Jeffrey Epstein? Jean, what's your understanding of Jeffrey Epstein as of now?
The Jeffrey Epstein situation and case is very disturbing. Obviously, there's a lot of theories about it. So based on my knowledge, all I know is that he had an island and he will invite very rich people, not like very wealthy people, millionaires, billionaires, multi-billionaires actually, and he will just host them, have parties there. And the disturbing case is that he will have minors on an island, um, minors. So, minors meaning anywhere from 11 years old to 17 years old. And
Mm.
he will have a disturbing amount of them. Obviously, unfortunately, it will be girls um, of any background that will be there. And, sexual stuff, unfortunately, very disturbing stuff doing. And Epstein was known to have to be doing that with a lot of young girls. He would like, tell them, okay, you're going there for work, I'll make your life easier. And, that's how predators
Mhm,
will do.
mhm.
They will like lure very young girls, innocent girls that don't know any better and
Yeah.
will abuse them. So, and obviously what made this case very popular is like, because obviously he was a very rich person, but he also bring very rich people, very famous people, powerful people on that island to have those parties and those moments. So yeah, that's pretty much what I know about the Epstein
Okay.
files. And then a lot of different things that happen, very disturbing, that we'll be talking about. So
Okay, perfect.
mhm.
So, when it comes to this topic of Jeffrey Epstein, I've been looking into this one for a little while. I haven't really said this verbally, but I'm very interested in going into investigations. Right now, I'm currently a teacher. And so, when it comes to the Jeffrey Epstein thing, I just want to enlighten you on a few things that I feel like most people know when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein about the human trafficking, the basically prostitution of minors. That's usually what people understand about Jeff Epstein. But first, I'm going to kind of go into a little bit of the background for those who don't know. So, Jeffrey Epstein, to what it is said online, is that he and his family, specifically his family, that they were Holocaust survivors. In fact, let me actually share their name right now.
Mhm.
Father's name, Seymour Epstein, worked as a construction laborer before becoming a groundskeeper and gardener for the New York City's park department. And then the mother was said to have worked as a school aide and then eventually as a secretary for an insurance company. And so that's at least the official narrative of what's found online with their parents. The parents worked really, really hard. If you read One Nation Under Blackmail, and if you haven't, Jean, you should. It's awesome.
Mhm.
So if you don't really care to what led to the rise of Jeffrey Epstein, you could read that later. Book two actually discusses the way he was raised. And what the book said, Whitney Webb had claimed that Jeffrey Epstein's parents, that they worked really hard to get him into private schools because they wanted him to get out of the sort of like bad version of New York City, kind of work their way up. And so that's sort of where he was at with that. But the strange part about Jeff Epstein that most people don't talk about that they should is that he became a billionaire seemingly out of nowhere. Nobody knows how to trace back to where his money came from. And so like I know that like for a while he worked at the Dalton School in New York, which was actually a prestigious high school, and it was a private school, and you have to understand that like you need credentials to teach, right? And so Jeff Epstein didn't have those credentials. He had no teaching credentials. How did he end up in a job in a private school that's very famously known to be prestigious without any credentials? And so he worked there as a math teacher, and there was claims from the students who were there from the start that not only was he kind of flirtatious with the females that were there, but he imagine this, John, okay?
Hmm.
That you have high school teacher, right? And you see them at parties that the high schoolers throw. So a bunch of people who later on came out and they were at those parties. These were all high schoolers at the time that were like, we all thought it was kind of weird that Mr. Epstein was at the parties. And so he was just like, what kind of adult shows up to those kind of parties, you
Yeah,
know?
that's so weird. Yeah.
Exactly. So like
Hmm.
that's the thing. It's like from the start, like how the heck did he get that job? After he left, which apparently they said that like he said that he left in his own accord and he resigned, but really there was a big scandal that broke out in the Dalton school where some kids and parents were getting involved, that the kids were being kind of like groomed by him. There's so many different accounts to why he left. I will reserve my opinions as to what I think until the end about that.
Hmm.
But it was a very strange situation that what led to him leaving. And so, in fact, interesting fact, I'm going to have to look up his name here in a second, but
Hmm.
one of the people who worked as Donald Trump's, I believe it was Donald Trump and Barack Obama's district attorney,
Hmm.
basically, what, not district attorney, the attorney general. There you go. You know how Pam Bondi's the attorney general? One of the
Yes.
attorney generals for both Barack Obama and Donald Trump, that they act, the parent of that guy, I have to look up his name, his father was the principal who hired Jeff Epstein at
Oh
Dalton
God.
School.
Hmm. Wow, that's
This is
incredible.
all like super interconnected, and it's like,
Hmm.
what? And you ask that guy, like the son, like, why did your father hire him? And they're like,
Hmm.
oh, my father didn't hire him. There was a principal that was there later on, and that principal says no, he hired him. So like
Hmm.
now everybody's negating who did it,
That,
basically,
yeah, and
right?
that's the thing with the rich people is that they have connections. You know,
Yep.
um, it's always like that. That's why when you go to Harvard, you don't really go for the degree, you go for the connections. You go to Harvard for the connections because that's how you get jobs. You know, that's how, because let's say you work at college, and then your dad's friend has a business, or knows someone. It's always like that. But I think the sad part about the Epstein files is that it happened like in the 90s, or early 2000s, right? So she will not really get away with it nowadays with all the technology we have. Imagine you see a teacher, you post it on Instagram, it's over.
Oh,
You're like,
now
look at what
now
is
you
this?
can't do any of that
Yeah,
stuff.
what
Yeah,
is this
yeah,
40-year-old doing at a 16-year-old party? Like, that's so weird. Like, get
yeah.
out of here, like, it's over, his life will be over by that point of time. So that's the thing. It's like back in the day, you have to look at it this way, how it was it was 30 years ago, 35 years ago, all this happened. But it's so sad that something like that just happened. And obviously, we don't know for sure. As you were saying, we're going to talk about what the reason why he got kicked out. But it's very obvious, like flirting with young girls. you know um it's disturbing, especially you as a teacher. It's something that is very disturbing. Like, and he will be allowed to do that with those connections. So this whole Epstein file thing, honestly, the source of this, I believe that is basically because it's all about connections. It's all about people getting away with it. Rich people getting away with it.
I
But
found it.
yeah.
I found it, by the
You
way.
found it? Okay.
Jeffrey Epstein was hired as a math and science teacher at the elite Dalton School in the mid
Hmm.
1970s by school headmaster
Oh
Donald
my.
Barr.
1970s. Yeah,
Yo,
yeah.
that was a lot earlier.
I thought it
Yeah, it
was
was the
1990.
1970s.
Yeah, it's
That's
over.
even
Yeah,
worse. It's like,
yeah. That's even
dang.
worse. No cell
Yeah.
phones. No phones. Really. Like, yeah.
No, yeah. Donald Barr was the father of former Attorney General William Barr.
Hmm.
Who had hired him as Attorney General? It was either Barack Obama. I believe it was Barack Obama and Donald Trump's first term. I'd have to fact
Hmm.
check that in a second. But yeah, that you're correct. I mean, think about it. Like, even amongst just like regular people, connections help you with everything, correct?
Hmm. Yeah.
So now imagine in a grander scale, it's like, and especially for schools like the Dalton School, where they oftentimes went to Ivy League schools right after, it's like the
Hmm.
connections run even deeper.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of what happened. And not only that, one more thing about Donald Barr, that principal also
Hmm.
left due to conflicts that he was having, that he kept hiring. He was notoriously known, this is what the staff had said, Donald Barr was notoriously known for hiring people who were not your traditional route. Like, oh, they got a bachelor's degree in this, or they are qualified because of this. It's usually because of connections and stuff.
Mhm.
And they were also, I know Donald Barr had issues with the parents and the faculty there because some people who were supposed to get into that school were not, they didn't get into that school, and he was favoring certain people, almost like doing favors for people, you know?
Mhm.
So I know he had issues in that way. But I'm so glad you brought up that point, by the way. Yeah, like you can't get away with that now. Like someone would
No.
be posting and be like, dude, this person's here, right?
Mhm.
So
It's so
yeah,
real.
and after Jeff Epstein ended up leaving the Dalton school, he ended up going to a banking system called a banking firm called Bear Stearns.
Mhm.
And so like there, this is another crazy part is that like the number one thing that I learned about studying Jeff Epstein for anyone who's interested in knowing is that there was a bunch of they said this, they said that, they said this, and it's like you can't really confirm what's true. And that's very common, a very common what I consider tactic to try to kind of get people scrambling everywhere to try to focus on facts that don't really matter, right? And
Yes.
so with Jeff Epstein, they said that he was like a musical genius, but then his brother was like, what are you guys talking about? Right. Or other people were like, yeah, he performed here. And then other people can really verify that. So with Bear Stearns, he was hired there. And I don't actually know how much experience he had in it. As much as far as I know, he didn't have any credentials to be working for a bank. And what they claimed why they had hired him was because he had like an aptitude for like risk taking and like basically like he was like smart and like a genius, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the common, that's kind of like what they mentioned why they hired him at Bear Stearns, but he quickly moved up the ladder really, really fast. And he became seemingly like a billionaire overnight.
Mhm.
Nobody knows where he got his money from. And so they
Yeah.
started moving him to towards bigger clients at that bank. And so what he oftentimes did is that he flew over and started meeting clients and trying to like convince them to invest or to do all of these things, right? And the reason why he left Bear Stearns, and again, we run into this again, John, where it's like, well, he left because of this. Oh, he left because of that. But the overall story that most people corroborate with that is the reason why he left is because he did a really risky investment where he didn't go through all the checklists like before
Mhm.
you're allowed to sign off on that stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So he sort of didn't follow company procedure, but they said that he left because he found business opportunities elsewhere. So
Mhm.
it's like, you know, you kind of run into that. And I believe this is kind of where he got more connection to those like cuz like imagine working for a really powerful and like famous bank, and that's where you start meeting the billionaires and the millionaires, right? So I
Mhm.
think that's where the connection kind of came in.
And
Mhm.
that's the thing, and I have to mention that, for everybody that believes that people become rich by luck, it's not the case. Okay, you can be the hardest worker in the world, but if you don't have the connections to get to where you want to be, you're not gonna get there. Like Zuckerberg, right? He didn't get rich because he had, he was a hard worker. Because a lot of talented programmers out there that are even more talented than him. But because he had the connection, he went to Harvard. He had the connections that led him to the investors that brought him money, capital to be able to build Facebook and obviously get to where Meta is now. So that's the same thing for Epstein. He had connections working with that bank. You can convince rich people to invest in something, and then we don't know exactly how he became rich, but it's very obvious because it's through connections. That's how he was able to build those connections and get there. And then and obviously they have favors, they talk to each other about favors, and then that's how it leads to one thing and another. And obviously that's probably why he got fired, because or he quit or whatever reason they gave
Yeah,
um
the resignation,
the
right? Even though there
resignation.
was
So
issues, yeah.
like, and obviously the company's not gonna tell the reason why the real reason why he left, for obvious reasons, because they're dealing with really powerful rich people. It's always like
Yep.
that. So just one lesson to take away here: he obviously had really good connections. That's how he got to where he is, because he had really good connections, and he obviously took advantage of that, and that which led to the awful things he eventually started doing.
Exactly. And in fact, the only reason we know that he got into trouble at Bear Stearns is because the bank was actually indicted. They actually wanted to see all of the paperwork. They wanted to like confirm all of the allegations that some essentially imagine you're working there with Jeff Epstein and you see the stuff he's doing. You're like, that's not procedure. Like that's illegal. You can't do that. You can't invest the
Mhm.
money of these people like in this way, right? Or like, where's the money going? And so like all of that stuff, the law, like law enforcement officers got involved. like that. So that's sort of what led to like it kind of becoming a scandal, but it wasn't a big scandal because they kind of closed that up pretty quickly.
Hmm.
And so after he left Bear Stearns, and I know whoever's watching is probably going to be like, where does this come into sex trafficking, right? To be honest, I think it was there the whole time. From when he was working at the Dalton School with high schoolers, I feel like he was already grooming them, sort of getting a feel for how to do that. Going to Bear Stearns is now the connection in between, right?
Hmm.
So that he can start getting to know the people who are in these higher echelons of society, who are billionaires, make a lot more money. And sort of like after he left Bear Stearns, or maybe even during, is when
Hmm.
all of this kind of connected. And so I know one of the big issues that Jeff Epstein got involved in, I believe it was in the 1990s. I have to
Hmm.
confirm that. So
Yep.
he actually, people think that when he got arrested and everyone was like, oh my gosh, he's a human trafficker, that was the first time. No, he was
Hmm.
actually arrested before too, where he was charged for I believe it was like prostitution with minors and stuff.
Okay.
So for those who don't know how Jeffrey Epstein worked, obviously you guys see that like he became a billionaire overnight, but what he did, the ultimate thing he did is that he met with these billionaires and he invited them over to his private island. And as Jean has already mentioned, is that the key thing here is blackmail. So if you get people who are really powerful, very famous, they came over to the island, and either these people did it naturally because they were already pedophiles and he recorded them doing stuff like lewd acts and like really inappropriate stuff with minors or barely minors, and then he recorded it and he used those recordings as blackmail essentially. In fact, after Jeff Epstein, the second time he got arrested and the most famous time when everybody found out about him, they actually went in and they searched all of his private island and they found cameras all over the walls in every single room. Essentially, it was a blackmail operation where he got them to do bad things. And to be honest, it's not so different from the Diddy thing, right? Where Diddy sort of blackmailed a bunch of people in Hollywood, in his house too, as well. When they raided Diddy, there was cameras everywhere.
Hmm.
And so, if what we can learn from the Diddy thing that likely applied to the Epstein thing is that if these famous people or these billionaires or politicians were unwilling to do, bad acts with minors or sexual acts with minors, they would, this is what Diddy would do with Hollywood. He would lace their drinks with drugs, and I don't know if you know this exists, Sean, but like
Hmm.
aerosols are a thing too now,
Hmm.
where like you can release aerosols and if you inhale it, basically people get drugged, right?
Yep.
So I know it's like, dang, we're not even safe from breathing, right? So like that's sort of what those people ran into. So even if they weren't necessarily pedophiles, if you're drugged enough and you're kind of like lucid, right, then you do bad things with someone that you don't know is a minor, and then you get recorded and it's like, okay, well, remember that so and so person that works in the government that tell them to do this in favor of the interests of whoever is giving Jeff Epstein the money, and then we won't release these tapes, right?
Hmm.
So it was a big blackmail operation. And I don't just mean like just the US, it was like everywhere. There was people who were involved in the UK, in Israel, in the US, in the Middle East. It was like the whole Middle East. There's so many billionaires, the biggest elites around the world.
Hmm.
And they were basically, a lot of them were found to have gone to Jeffrey Epstein's island. Bill
Yeah.
Clinton, all of these
Bill
people.
Clinton. Yeah, and you hear about Andrew. I forgot the last name, but like he's part of the royal family, and his name is
Oh yeah,
Andrew.
Prince Andrew.
Prince
Yeah.
Andrew, yeah, he was like somehow part of this. So as you were saying, it was international, pretty much thing, and it just tells you that there's so many bad things happening on this planet
Yeah.
that we don't know about. And the rich and powerful, obviously, with all the money, they can hide things, and most of the time they don't get caught. And it's very sad that all I can think about is like all those those poor not I should say poor, but like those women, those girls that went through that, and they just get to live with this for the rest of their lives. We have to think about the victims there, that this all these horrible things were happening to them. I don't know if you're ready to dive into that yet or not. um
Yes, actually. So,
mhm,
oh my gosh, I found this out this weekend, Jean.
mhm.
So, you want to know what's crazy? So do you remember the company of that did like the photography for kids, like when you were in high school and stuff? What was the name of the company? Do you remember?
uh
It's
I
okay if
don't
you don't. Most
remember.
people
Yeah,
don't know, right?
I
You
don't
just
know.
go and you take school photos, correct? So
Yes,
that's the
also, yep.
point. Is that like I found out recently, because like whether it be Christian schools, like even SDA schools use this, by the way, Seventh Day Adventist
Hmm.
schools, as well as public schools. So Life Touch, remember Life Touch?
Yeah,
That
yeah, yeah.
was the
That
company that
rings
took
a bell.
pictures, right?
Okay, that
So
rings a
you
bell. Yep.
wonder, how did Jeffrey Epstein find these girls that were willing to do this, right?
Mhm.
So as you know, it's really expensive nowadays to be able to live in New York City,
Mhm.
anywhere really, but New York City especially. So so that's where Ghislaine Maxwell came in, or Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't really know how to say her name correctly. So Ghislaine Maxwell was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a man who was actually sent to court, and he was accused of being Mossad agent, as well a double agent for the Mossad as well as for the UK. And so he was accused of all this stuff. And Robert Maxwell was also the guy who owned most of MTV. And
Mhm.
so he was already accused of also running some kind of blackmail operation on the US as well. And you know how he died? He died by being pushed off of his yacht. Or actually, my bad. Oops. He fell off the yacht,
Hmm.
right? That's what they said happened. He fell off the yacht.
Mhm. Yep.
So it's like interesting. He was about to go to court to find out who he exactly worked for, even though they had some evidence already, and he was pushed off. His daughter dated Jeffrey Epstein, and so that's Ghislaine Maxwell. I'll put a picture on this later.
Mhm.
But Ghislaine Maxwell was the woman who basically went and found all these girls and
Yeah,
boys,
yeah, yeah,
by the way,
yeah.
and boys.
Isn't she in jail right now? I think
She's in jail
that's the
right
girl, right?
now, but
That
but
she was like his right hand. I think that's
yeah,
what she was. Okay.
exactly.
Mhm.
Though to be honest, when it comes to look, I'm just going to speak my honest mind about Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't really know how to feel about her
Mhm.
because she, having the father that she did, right? It's like,
Mhm.
imagine being raised from a little girl all the way up, and you have a father who's running a blackmail operation, who's
Mhm.
working with all of these, in my opinion, because I'm a Christian, I believe this, the very satanic people, because
Mhm.
no regular human being will harm children the way they did, right?
Yeah.
And she was raised by him. Obviously, she's an adult, still accountable to her actions. She belongs in jail. But I wonder how much of this stuff was initially her choice when she was younger. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But Ghislaine Maxwell, regardless, she went and she found the women. And you wonder, and this is where this is all connected, by the way. I was mind blown. Life Touch. They take a picture, and I already knew this as a teacher because we use Life Touch even now at my
Mhm.
school. You take a picture, the name of the kid is there, the date of birth, what grade they're in, right? And so apparently, I don't know if you're aware of that one organization. It's like the Centers for Missing Children and Exploited Victims, or whatever it's called, right? You just
Mhm.
look that up, the actual company will pop up. They worked with Life Touch to try to prevent human trafficking. Mind you, that same company, let me make sure I get the name right. It's Centers for Missing and Exploited Children, I believe. Okay. Yeah. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So, mind you, look, I don't claim any political party, but that's the same organization that Donald Trump wanted to defund because he said they were up to no good,
Mhm.
essentially. Right. And so
Wow.
it's like, could you imagine the news line, right? Like,
Mhm.
Trump wants to defund the organization that wants to help missing kids, right? Instead of asking the question, hey, it's not whether he's right or wrong, but why is he wanting to defund them? Like, what are the reasons, right? Because you kind of want to know, right? So
Yep.
the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they
Mhm.
actually collaborated with Life Touch
Mhm.
to basically help protect these kids, right? When they built these profiles and stuff. But later on, come to find out, the CEO of Life Touch, let me actually verify this right now. CEO of Life Touch.
Yep.
Yeah,
That is wild. There's so many bad things happening on this planet. It's like, wow.
I found it. So it says Leon Black, co-founder and CEO, was
Mhm.
Jeffrey Epstein's largest client. No, let me see. Where was it? Billionaire Leon Black 100 made a $158,000 payment to Jeff Epstein. Yes. Oh man, I'm gonna have to go back and we'll touch up on the subject later. But essentially, one of the main people that worked for this Life Touch company,
Mhm.
at least allegedly, right,
Mhm.
that they had sent millions of dollars to Jeff Epstein. Now, I'm not saying this actually happened, okay, but this is the part where I have to make sure it's a disclaimer. I'm just speculating here. If companies like Life Touch, which are they do work in collaboration, like their company is actually in New York City, the
Mhm.
same New York City where a lot of those victims came from, right? And so let's just assume here that Jeff Epstein worked with the CEO of Life Touch, right? if they really did work together, and assuming that Jeff Epstein was the king of blackmail, it is entirely possible that the way he got pictures of these young ladies could have been from them. It's entirely possible, but I'm not claiming it to be fact. I just thought I'd
Hmm.
share that with you because I was so mind blown this weekend. I was like,
Hmm.
dang, right? So that could be one way, but another way, also keep in mind that like all of this stuff sort of happened in the 90s and the 2000s, all of it. So I don't know how far back it goes. But for sure, one of the victims of Jeff Epstein, she claimed that what's her name? My mind's spacing out on her name. So she's like the blonde one. I don't know if you know her, but like she's the one who passed away recently, was hit by like a
Yeah.
bus or something.
Yes, that she
Yeah, I
passed
forgot
away.
her name.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm being so spacey right now, but
Hmm.
basically, she claimed that while she was in the car with Ghislaine Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell came up to her knowing that she was in need and sort of like said, "Hey, I know that you're going to massage therapy school. Like, I can provide many opportunities for you to move your way up." So while she was in the limousine, sometimes Ghislaine Maxwell, while in the car that they were in, she would ask their driver to stop. She'd get out of the car real quick, talk to a few young ladies, give them the card, the same card that she gave her, basically saying that she could give them a lot of opportunities. And
Hmm.
that's how they basically did it. They basically went to these desperate young ladies and offered them opportunities. And a lot of them didn't know that they would end up giving Jeff Epstein uncomfortable massages. And then all of a
Hmm.
sudden it just, it
One
just
led to
got
another. Yeah.
worse.
Yeah. It's like, everything was pretty much orchestrated. Like I would also like, always wondered how he got so many girls. There must be like, and that's why he had that lady that will recruit, because obviously, the young girls, they're kind of taught from the young age not to trust men, especially older men. So like, I think if they have a lady that is more, that is first of all, is a woman that will approach them and like, talk to them, hey, like, you should come over to this place, you gotta make a lot of money, nothing illegal, and then they will just like groom them eventually. Because what I've heard is that they would tell them it would be about a modeling job, or it would be
Modeling
about,
jobs, sometimes that's what it was. Yep.
that's how
Hmm.
it was. And then and then there was so many stories about, there was that one lady that he would pretty much hire her, even though she was underqualified for the job, hire her for the company, and then eventually she will see things that were not appropriate, and she would just, it's like, it was never like they would just throw them into the scene like that. It was always like something very gradual. They would just start with, oh no, there's nothing going on, just come over, and then eventually it would lead to where they
Not only
wanted to
that,
go,
but like
which is
when you
so
think
sad.
about it, there's a
Yeah.
psychology behind all of this. It's
Hmm.
sort of like someone who was abused, like say like you're going, like a female is going home and it's dark and someone takes advantage of her in the darkness, right? That
Hmm.
wasn't your choice. Like it happened to you,
Hmm.
correct?
Hmm.
But their process of doing things is like, "Hey, here's a card, and you made the choice by coming to me." You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So there's sort of like a psychology behind what they did. And by the way,
Hmm.
I figured out who it was. So the guy is Leon Black, and it wasn't that it was Life Touch itself. It's that he was in charge of Apollo Management, which CEO of Apollo Management, which acquired Life Touch later.
Hmm.
But I don't know how far that date goes back. I know it goes before Jeff Epstein was arrested. I know it goes. So what I mean is like somewhere along the way, this could have been a thing. I just want to make
Hmm.
sure I verified that.
Yeah.
Second of all, you're correct about the modeling jobs. I don't know if you're familiar with Les Wexner.
Yes.
Leslie Wexner was basically the main owner of the stocks of Abercrombie and Fitch. And
Hmm.
so a lot of and you can find all this stuff if you just look up Abercrombie and Fitch survivors, like
Hmm.
from like Epstein. They will tell you, and it's sad to say, Jean, but a lot of them were male, right? And so they said like, I went in there for a modeling job, and then we were being trafficked in the background. Nobody knew, but we were offered opportunities as long as we did that, right?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, all of this is very scary stuff. And to be honest, we're scratching the surface. Just because I don't want this video to get like censored or anything like that,
Hmm.
let's just say that like when you belong in those billionaire societies, you see a lot of dark stuff, and that really messes with your psyche, right? Or like some of these people who, it's all a chain, right? Trauma is like a chain where like if you were abused, you're more likely to abuse other people, and then that those people are more likely to abuse other people. It's almost like an evil ripple effect. And so a lot of these people were like, how could they be so evil? Well, a lot of them were abused when they were little too. It's not an excuse, but like that's how it works. So what happens when you get abused at a really, really, really young age? You may want to abuse people at a really, really, really young age. So just
Yeah.
to keep it general, I think that Jeff Epstein, the only parts that get exposed to him are when it's the trafficking of like 13-year-old and up. But what a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of the investigators that found the footage that doesn't exist, right? That's what the government's saying, right? It doesn't exist.
Hmm.
They said there was hundreds and thousands of hours recorded of these people, right? And
Hmm.
now they're saying it doesn't exist. But before they said that, the investigators that actually went in, like the police officers, FBI agents that watched these videos said that they vomited and that some of these abuses were happening from children under the age of 10.
Oh my God.
No, isn't that horrific? Isn't that
That
it's
is.
just horrific. Because think about it, if you were traumatized at a really young age, this is what I'm trying to get
Hmm.
at. Is
Hmm.
trauma gets passed on. And by the way, this is also just a disclaimer I want to throw out there, and it actually relates to pornography as well. So like something about people who are heavily addicted to pornography is that like when you watch it enough, you kind of get, this is how the human psyche works, you kind of
Hmm.
get bored of it and you want to
Hmm.
get into deeper, darker stuff, and
Hmm.
eventually it gets darker and darker and darker, where like people start getting into that gray area of like maybe people who kind of look like children even if they are adults, right?
Yeah.
And so like I think that with these grander scales, because they have money and because they have power, they've
Hmm.
seen a lot of really dark stuff.
Hmm.
And so that trauma from seeing that, because if you're human, that will affect your brain, right? And it's not normal to see little kids get abused. You sort of reinforce this. You know what I mean?
Hmm. I know
And so the
exactly what
way
you mean.
exactly, and so the way
Hmm.
Jeff Epstein would do it is that for the really, really major like banking clients that were like borderline trillionaires, right?
Hmm.
They have everything they could possibly want. So what would they likely want? They'd want what is the least like the worst possible thing. Like to them, the only way they can gain feeling is if they can get the worst possible thing, which is like the worst thing you can think of is the abuse of like, say, a really small person, right? I'm gonna leave it at that because that's the stuff that got recorded. That's
Hmm.
the real, like, sure, I'm like, it's terrible. It really is bad, any sort of abuse. But the kind that will make people start wars is I have a video of you abusing a really young child.
Yeah.
That is enough to get people to do whatever you want, right?
Exactly. Yeah, pretty much. That's blackmail. And again, we're not gonna go into the deep details that you were saying, so we're gonna get
Exactly.
censored.
Mhm.
But yeah, pretty much. If like, imagine you are a business owner or like you're a billionaire and you have so many businesses, your life will be over the moment that these are leaked. It's over. Your life, your marriage. Imagine like some of those people even have their own children. Imagine you are one of their kid and you see your dad or your mom doing that to other kids. It's like to other small people. Sorry. Um, it's very disturbing. And then so obviously whenever you have all of that, it's like you can pretty much get them to do anything, like you just said. You can tell them, so wire me $1 billion right now. If otherwise I'm like you're gonna do it because your life will be over. So that is just so disturbing. Like he will bring people to those islands, very famous people, and he will be young girls on those islands, and then you know god knows what. And whenever, obviously I'm not a woman, I've never been a 14-year-old girl, but I'm assuming, I mean, I've been a young kid too, so I'm assuming whenever an adult
Mm,
brings you there and tells you to do things, especially at that age, you don't know what's going on. You're
yeah,
confused. you know
exactly,
you're like,
exactly.
okay, I guess I have to do it. I have to do what an adult is telling me to do. And it's just so disturbing,
It's
and
so
I just.
disturbing. It
Mhm.
is. And you know what? I have it right here. So the first time Jeffrey Epstein was arrested was in July 23 of 2006 by Palm Beach police after a
Mhm.
grand jury indicted him on one count of soliciting prostitution. That's what it is. He
Mhm.
spent one night in jail before being released on a $3,000 bond. $3,000? What is that? The
and,
state
and
level charge. What were
yeah.
you gonna say? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was saying this is the problem in this country, is that I love this country, right? I mean, it has a lot of like good things, but then rich people get away with anything. And imagine if it was like a guy that looked like me, right? Okay. um it's just so sad. Like, it's just the truth. I'm a black person, for people that are listening. A black man, doing that, that would be what, for life,
Yep.
and it's
Yep.
a rich, white man. 1 year, one day, one
One
night, not even one day,
night.
one night, and $3,000 is like a penny for, not even a penny. It's like nothing for him. You know?
It's like you cut a penny in half, man. Like
Yeah.
seriously.
And it's like,
Yeah, and
wow.
so this is what I mean is that like
Hmm.
most people don't know he was arrested before. And you
Hmm.
want to know what's crazy is
Hmm.
that the guy who actually led the to basically he was a US attorney who was involved in the decision of basically letting Jeff Epstein go that
Hmm.
night, way back when, right? And so he claimed, not in like public interview, but in like a private interview that they did, he said that the reason why he let Jeff Epstein go was because he belonged to intelligence, and so he had to back off.
Hmm.
That's what he claimed. Which later, keep in mind, is that if you were to Google this on the internet, oh, the U.S. attorney that was involved in releasing Jeff Epstein, it's going to say that the claim is false. And you know why? Because this guy, Alex Acosta, later on ended up becoming labor secretary for Trump admin. So
Hmm.
he was going for a bigger office, right? And so he now basically takes back that comment and said that he never said that, even though
Wow.
it was already recorded that he said, hey, he belonged to intelligence.
Hmm.
And so, look, I'm not trying to go there, right? But
Hmm.
like, if there is follow the money and you'll know exactly who they work for, and that's what
Hmm.
people didn't do. The biggest issue with Jeff Epstein, yes, is that he was a human trafficker and that should be a priority, but the only way you're going to know what he did is if you follow the money. And if you followed the money, you'll realize that a lot of his donation and support actually went to the state of Israel, and that the previous prime minister of Israel, what was his name, it was I'm trying to remember his name, the
Is it
one
the one from the
before.
90s? The one that got killed?
Did he
Oh,
get
no.
killed?
Yeah, there
No,
was a
it
prime
was the one
minister.
before Benjamin Netanyahu. What was his name? Let me see. Prime Minister before Netanyahu. I
Sammy
don't want to get
Perez.
too distracted. Yeah, it was either him or it was like some kind of. It
There was
might have
also
been this guy,
Ehud
Ehud. It might
Barak.
have been that guy. It might have been Ehud.
Anyway, it was one of the prime
It was
ministers
one of the
for
prime ministers
Israel.
of
Yeah.
Israel. You can look up former prime
Hmm.
minister of Israel going into Jeff Epstein's apartment.
Hmm.
Let me use my computer camera now.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So
Hmm.
picture this: a guy
Hmm.
covered his face like this, entering Jeff Epstein's apartment.
No way.
Not even, yes. So
Wow.
if you follow the money, you'll know
Hmm.
what, you know what I mean? And so like
Hmm.
Jeff Epstein was very oftentimes accused of being a Mossad agent. I'm not saying he was, but if you follow the money, that's where the money is going, to the state of Israel. Okay.
Hmm.
And so again, I'm just making the connections here. And why does it matter? Because if you are a smaller country who has big interests in the Middle East,
Hmm.
then you're going to want to have blackmail on US politicians, because if they disagree with you, then you can basically say, hey, let's go over here. We're just going to be having like a party in a yacht, or we're just going to be, whatever it is, right? And then boom, they get them recorded or whatever it might be. Then they get blackmail on them, and now they have to listen to what they have to say. In my opinion, people don't trace the money enough. They're just like, he was a human trafficker. I'm like, if you
Hmm.
really want to make a difference on Jeff Epstein being a human trafficker, you have to follow the money. But that's where it gets buried. Just like this guy over here, this U.S. general basically this U.S. attorney taking back that he was a Mossad agent. It's like, dude, are you serious? Just because now he had a job in this. Sorry.
Yeah,
My
and then
sister was calling me here.
it's so
Um,
sad. Yeah, I don't want to say that there were corruption or anything. I don't want to assume anything, but like,
exactly.
like getting away like for something like this major like prostitution, like it's a big deal, especially in the state of Florida. I mean, I don't know how back in the day Florida was, but Florida doesn't mess around with those kind of things. It's one of the states that if you messed with that, like you're going down for it. So obviously, it's for his connections. That's the only reason why he got away with so much. That's why he got away with like with all the way, like it's just insane. How what you can do with money and connections. And obviously you were saying that it was backed by Israel, and then um yeah, it's a sad world that we live in for sure.
Exactly. And the
Yeah.
last thing I'll say about this Jeff Epstein thing, just so we can keep it general, right? Because then
Hmm.
we'll get into the depths of it, is
Hmm.
that there's actually a huge connection between Jeff Epstein and Diddy as well. So,
No way.
like, yeah, because if you follow the story of Diddy, it's the
Hmm.
same. If you just look up Whitney Webb and Diddy story, she wrote a whole humongous article on it that'll take you like an hour and a half.
Mhm.
So, or an hour and 20 minutes. If you have some tea or whatever, just sit down and read it because it is really good. And so she basically talks like the upbringing of Epstein was very similar to the upbringing of Diddy. Diddy also
Mhm.
went to a private school. It was a religious school. It was all boys. And when you look at the years that he was there was teachers who were actually arrested for basically having abused minors.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's
Oh
like the
my
same
god.
stuff. It's like the same story. That's the schools that Diddy came out of. And what did Diddy do in a smaller scale? He basically, by smaller, it's like Hollywood is still pretty big, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's what happened with Diddy is that like he created all of these what he called them. They called them like white parties, the freak off parties, right? Where they
Mhm.
came in all white, and then it was really after the big party that the freak offs would happen, and they would record Hollywood artists basically doing really terrible acts, and we'll just keep it at that, right? And so he ran a blackmail operation that if they were to, say, for example, sell out their communities, so that they can gain influence on them. And this is one of the biggest things that I have. The differences between Epstein and Diddy is that Diddy was more for the smaller public as far as like us and what we're listening to with music, right? Like, because you can push an agenda in music, right? To get, for example, say, to try to promote in the music to hate Donald Trump or to maybe hey, leaving your girl is like the thing you should do, or like having a lot of b words. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like if you push that in the culture, then that's what people will do. Whereas Jeffrey Epstein worked in a grander scale when it came to politicians, and so those are the big world decisions, the kind that made the U.S. send troops overseas, right? So like those are kind of like the differences, but like they all cross over, and I'll talk about that more later. Of course, we still to this day can never claim who funded Jeffrey Epstein. If we follow the money, we see the where a lot of it tends to go, right? And
Mhm.
so now let's say for a moment that, because if you want my honest belief on this, I don't think it was just Israel. I think it's kind of like if everyone sees pie at the center, everyone's trying to get their own little piece, right? So I believe the UK is involved with this just as much as the state of Israel is. We
Mhm.
just don't know how much, right? So let's just say that the state of Israel had an agenda to try to take down different countries, right? The best thing to do is to run a blackmail operation to try to get sway people a certain direction or not, right? And so one of the most recent events that has happened in the Middle East was what happened between Israel and Palestine, unfortunately. And so I was just curious, since I know you, it seemed to me like you know more about this topic than I do. So why don't you take away at this? What happened between Israel and Palestine?
Yeah, the one thing about me is that I'm really into history, knowing exactly what happened in the past and everything like that. So, whew, that's a very long story, but obviously, we're not gonna go through everything. Today, at least, we're gonna just briefly touch the topic. So, to go back to the story of Israel and Palestine, you have to go back to very ancient time, and it's not just because you are, if you're not a believer, it's just it's actual facts, right? So he comes back from Isaac and Ismail. Those were the sons of Abraham, right?
So
So
explain what happened with that. With the what was the beef going on there?
so pretty much it started from there. So I don't know if you know the backstory, and that's not just because because you're a believer or a Christian or whatever, but that's not just historical facts. So what happened is that um, Abraham could not have a kid with his wife, and then so he had, it was agreed upon with his wife to concede with another woman. So that's how Ismail was born, and then eventually God, eventually made it happen, and he had a son with his wife, which was Isaac, right? And what happened is that Isaac is like the father, is considered the father of the Jews, right? And Ismail is the father of the Palestinians, right? So that's pretty much the story of it. And this is, again, that's
Interesting.
historical facts. It's not just that's
Whoa.
that's actually how it happened. I don't
Sean,
know if you
I
knew
may
that.
be a Christian, but I feel like I don't know the Old Testament as much as I should. So like you're
Yeah,
enlightening me today. So go ahead.
yeah. So this is the history. So if you look at the books, like it's like historical facts. That's how they trace it all the way back there. So that's what happened. So from that moment, even if in the Bible you can see they always fought. The descendants of Isaac and Ismail like always fighting and all of that. So that's what led to where we are today, right? So pretty much the Jews. obviously had that land. They lived there, and then it would have, and then the Palestinians, I'm sure the Philistines, right? And then we have the people of Israel, right? I don't know if you know if you know much about the Bible and the Old Testament. They were always beefing, they were always fighting. They were living on that land for millenniums, okay? And then what happened is that eventually that led us to let's go back all the way to 1947, right?
Okay, okay.
Actually 1939, right?
Okay, okay.
With Hitler.
Okay.
Obviously we know what happened. Very sad story. He was a terrible person, killed 6 million Jews that we know of. It could be more than that. Unfortunately, the Holocaust, very sad thing, and again, I want to make sure everybody knows that listens to the podcast. I do not condone that. That was a horrible thing. Should never happen. Very sad about it, and then, yeah. So obviously after that, um, the British people back in the day were like, "Oh, we feel so bad at what happened to the Jews. Let's give them land. Let's give them somewhere they call themselves. They have their own country." Because obviously, the hating of Jews, it wasn't just the Germans. That's what people don't know about. The
Mm-hmm.
Germans just
That goes
just
way back.
exposed it, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
people just hated Jews all over Europe. People from the British
A lot
people
of them were getting kicked
back in
out
the
of their
day.
countries. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Spanish people, like it's documented that even in France, people just didn't like Jews. So Jews
Mhm.
have always been persecuted in Europe, right? It was just like I would say Hitler just made it official, and obviously those horrible things to them. So that's the story. So I had to go back to that so people understand the whole story of it, right? So I want to make sure people also know that there was no Israel um in the modern sense, in the modern
Yep.
history, right?
In fact, you know
Yeah.
what's interesting? Most people don't know that Israel hasn't been around that long, like the
Hmm.
official state of Israel. Like people think that that's been there for a long time, but do you
No,
know what year that was? It was like
1947.
1947 exactly.
1947. It
Yeah.
wasn't even, yeah, it wasn't even 100 years ago.
Yeah,
That's when,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah. So, um,
I do
yeah.
want to add on to
Hmm.
wait, can you
Actually,
elaborate
it's
on the UK?
1948. It's
On
1948. Actually,
the well, what do
1948.
you
Yeah.
mean by the UK and land?
So the UK, obviously, before the US, it was all the UK. The US was just a big country that nobody cared about in the early 1900s. The UK was the most powerful country by far, politically,
Oh
militarily,
yeah. Oh
everything.
yeah. For
And obviously,
sure.
we all know the British Empire. There are so many colonies on the planet. So pretty much, what World War One. Actually, we have to go back to World War One, right? That's when it started, right? The Ottoman Empire fell. So before there was any Israel, there was Palestine, there was Syria. All those countries that you see, Syria, Iraq, Iran, sorry, Iraq, Iran, Syria, they didn't exist. All those countries on that part of the world, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, none of those countries existed. It was the Ottoman Empire. Right?
Interesting. Go on.
They
Yeah.
they pretty much had this whole land for themselves, right? So what happened is that pretty much the British had control over that territory, and obviously everybody in the world was becoming independent from the British, especially back then. I don't know if you know much about colonialism back in the day. So like
Mhm.
pretty much because of World War II, the UK became so poor they couldn't hold the colonies anymore. They were
Yeah,
so weak,
yeah.
so they had to pretty much give up their colonies. So what happened is that Israel didn't exist back then. It was Palestine back in the day. So it was that
Yeah.
whole land where Israel is nowadays. It was Palestine. It was the
Mm.
Palestinians that were living there. So that's where that was their land, right? And then pretty much, but however, the British were like, we're gonna create a state for
What
the
what year was this when
Jews.
that happened?
It was in 1948. That's when,
1948. Okay.
yeah, that's when they decided, because it was right after World War II. After all the atrocities happened with Hitler. So I just want to make sure also not a lot of people know is that they wanted to give land at first to in Africa. They wanted to put a state of Israel
They
in Africa.
did?
Yes, that
Oh
was the
my
original plan,
gosh.
because there was land there. It was for the British. The British had pretty much all of that, like half of Africa belonged to the
Oh,
UK
dang. Okay,
back in the day.
okay.
So like, you know what, we're gonna just create a little small country for the Jews. But Jews were like, no, we want to go back to the promised land, the
Yep.
original land where our ancestors were from. That's where we belong, right? So the British decided, okay, let's create a state there. in Palestine, and literally that's literally what they were saying. Let's create a state of Israel in Palestine, and they just decided, okay, let's just like do that, and then create a state there, right? And that's when they had to move the people, because the people that were living there, so they had to move them out of there to create a country
So
of
I do
Israel.
have a question. What do you
Yeah,
know about the Havara Agreement?
Havara Agreement.
So the
I don't know.
Havara Agreement was
Mhm,
in 1933, which was essentially like, because like I learned this recently. I was like, there's no
mhm,
way. So apparently, before the mass extermination of Jews, Hitler actually had this thing called the Havara Agreement. And I kind of want to know, see if you understand a
mhm,
question I have here, in which there was Nazi German, it was a pragmatic deal between Nazi Germans and Zionists. They were
mhm.
German Jews who Hitler allowed to emigrate to Palestine by transferring some of their assets as German exports, basically saying, we don't want you here, move over, we'll send you over to Palestine. What do you know about that? Because it said that he allowed about 60,000 Jews to escape and to head
Mhm.
over to Palestine. How did that work?
Yeah,
Do you know?
yeah. So pretty much, Hitler just hated Jews. He hated
Okay.
everybody. Actually, everybody that didn't have blue eyes and was a blonde.
The
Obviously,
Aryan race.
he even hated
The
himself.
Aryan race.
Obviously, so he did, especially Jews. He just hated Jews for some reason. So pretty much, he just wanted to
Yeah.
get rid of them, right? So, and again, it was all about money. So the Avar agreement was all about assets. Obviously, transfer some of the assets by buying German goods for export to Palestine. So obviously, it was money. They were like, just give up your assets to us, and you can just go to Palestine, and just like move there. And that's the thing, is that the sad part about this whole story is that Palestinians there welcome Jews with open
Yeah, they
arms.
did. They welcomed
They were
them.
like, what, oh my,
Mhm.
you're being persecuted there. Everybody's hearing about what's going in World War II. Come over to our place. You can live among us in Palestine. And again, that's not me being on either side. I'm trying to be
That's just the
as
facts. That's what
neutral as
happened.
possible. It's just a
Yeah.
fact. They were moved to Palestine. There was no mention of the state of Israel. The state of Israel hasn't existed. Never existed really until then. So yeah, just to answer your question, Leslie, is that agreement was for just like, Hitler was like, let's get rid of them. Obviously it's the rich people. A poor person doesn't have money, doesn't have assets to transfer.
Oh gosh,
So
you're so right about
yeah,
that.
it's always the
So
rich
not
people that
all
get
of
away
them were
with
able
anything.
to go
Yeah,
anyways.
so you're not gonna see a really
Oh,
rich
that's so
Jewish guy, and for like Jewish guy in a concentration camp. That's impossible because they had assets to leave. They had the money. They had
so it's
connections.
oh my gosh, you just made
Yeah.
me realize that. So
Hmm.
essentially, it's like if you were poor and you were a Jew and you were there, that was it for you.
Yeah, you were done. You had no chance. You were
That's
done.
so
Yep.
sad.
So yeah, that was the agreement. The rich people like, oh yeah, let's make an agreement. Give us your assets for free. We don't have to
And
worry
we'll
about
let
it.
you
We'll
move
just
over
go
to
move over to
Palestine.
Palestine. So yeah, and that's how because those people also those people had connections, and it's always about connections in this
Yeah, it
world.
always is. Yeah.
So they
Mhm.
moved there, and they're like, once the war is over, then those people were like, you know what, we want a state now, because everybody was becoming independent. Like mid 1950s, everybody was becoming independent. African countries were becoming independent. People in that region, so we're like, we want a state, we want a country. So the original plan was Africa, but then they were like, no, we want to live in the promised land, and that's what created this whole issue. So now
Oh.
you guys have the backstory, obviously, very quickly talked about of what happened, how this whole issue began. Because obviously, if you move people that used to live there, it's not gonna work. And then the sad part is that they gave if you Google right now, they gave the best land possible to the Jews. The land that, like, obviously, if you have a country, you need agriculture, you need like fertile lands to be able to, like,
So they gave
um
those to the Jews that moved there.
the best possible land. So like the Palestinians really like had the worst deal possible. They gave the best land to the Jews. Like, here's your country, and then everybody that is in
Wow.
there, we don't
Okay.
care if you live there for thousands of years, because those Palestinian people will live under the Ottoman Empire for years, for hundreds of years. You know, they like like, for example, the quick story about why Columbus discovered obviously America, in quotation mark,
We
because the
speak
Ottoman
facts
Empire.
on this podcast,
Yeah,
okay? Go
yeah,
on, go
exactly.
on.
The Ottoman Empire, like, kind of like blocked them from going east. So they had to find another route. So the Ottoman Empire owned that land, Palestine, right? So that's what happened. That's the whole story of how it happened. So that's like, and then the UK when it took over, and then they wanted to give land to the Jews. They were like, you know what? Let's give them that land. And the Palestinians were like, what? What? Wait, that's our land. You used to live there for hundreds of years. Like, what? You know? So, and they call it the Nakba. I don't know if you heard of that before. That's a very important thing about this topic. Nakba is like they transfer millions of Palestinians. Just like imagine you live right now in your house, right? And they like come over and like they take over. They're like, you know what, you gotta get out because some new people are gonna take over your house.
So they moved Palestinians.
They literally moved them, forced them to get out of that land that was for the
That is
Jews.
now the modern state of Israel?
Yeah,
That one?
get out. Go live in that part
Interesting.
of
Okay.
Palestine that is Palestine, So they were forced to live. Imagine like you lived there for years, centuries, and they were taken from their home. And that's a historical fact. It's not me being biased or anything. I'm very
You
neutral here.
know,
It's a historical
John,
fact.
in my opinion, I feel like the reason why a lot of people in the US don't care is because we're a
Hmm.
country full of immigrants. And so
Hmm.
when you're first gen and you're born here, it's like you don't really have the generations worth of like, wow, this is our land. It's
Hmm.
just like innate within yourself. And that
Hmm.
your grandparents and your grandparents' grandparents told you about kind of like their childhood, their upbringing, their culture. And so, like, for us to hear, oh, well, they just made them move. Well, at least they didn't hurt them, right?
Hmm.
But because we're used to like, oh yeah, this is my country, and we are to some degree proud to be Americans,
Hmm.
but we don't have, it's not like for some of us it's like this, we've been here for generations upon generations in all of our culture. This, I'm just speaking as someone who's like a Chicana, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like
Yep.
when people say they're proud to be Mexican, for example, but then they know nothing about their heritage, they don't know the lands and the stories and everything like that. But for the Palestinians who were there for generations, to be
Hmm.
asked to move is like really a serious thing for them.
And it's kind of sad, and it's part of human history. Unfortunately, you have to also look at. I'm trying to be as neutral as possible, right?
Okay.
I'm not taking any sides here, but this is just part of human history where people just, are moved from place to place, are told to leave or lose land. Just like, Texas used to be from Mexico, right? And
Yep,
they lost,
exactly.
it's just part of history, right? But the sad part is that, if you look at the whole thing, is that, it was kind of very unfair to the Palestinians, right? Because look at all the countries that got their independence. People from Iraq, Jordan, Jordan, yes, it's that's how it's called, or Lebanon. They were not told to move. They became independent, right? But the Palestinians, instead of being given independence, they were told, you know what, just go somewhere. The Jews are gonna take over your land, and just deal with it. They were not given statehood, nothing. You know what I mean? So they had how you call it, it's like, when you're a poor kid, you have, the rich kid has the head start. So Israel had the head start from the beginning. They were given the best opportunities
Mm-hmm.
to grow, and the Palestinians pretty much were screwed over from the beginning. And that's what where the whole story starts. So now we have the whole history of how everything
The amount of
happened.
times these people have
Yep.
went into war. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
it's very unfortunate.
Yep.
I don't know. Like, to be honest,
Hmm.
if you want me to be honest, like I did not really become awake, what I call red pilled, right? The what
Hmm.
people are calling it nowadays, until like earlier this year, ending of last year. So
Hmm.
like when I first heard about like the Free Palestine stuff, I had no idea what they were talking about. Like I didn't understand any of that history. And it wasn't until like we started seeing on like online the videos of them getting blown up, and I was like, what is happening over there? If you want me to be honest, I didn't, and some people are still like this, by the way. I
Hmm.
didn't even know that that was like a full blown war. I thought that they were
Mm.
just being just borderline attacked, right? Or like attacked in some area. No, it's literally, quite literally, the decimation of these people, where like the
Hmm.
majority of it is children. It wasn't until recently when I started getting into more understanding. Um, I believe what first got me into this was like studying psychology books, and then trying to understand why children go missing, and then trafficking. And somewhere along the way, someone was writing something about the Palestinian children, and they're at risk for being trafficked because if there's no parents around and
Yeah.
there's war. And I was like, why do I keep running into the Palestine thing? Well, because they're being persecuted right now,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
then you look into also places like, and then me being a Christian, places like Damascus as well, where like some of the oldest Christian churches were there. And then I found out that they were getting blown up into pieces and like, like because like again, this is what I mean, like because we are becoming a country that's losing our faith, we don't understand what that means for like one of the very first Christian churches in Damascus to have gotten blown to pieces, how important and significant that is to the people that are there.
Hmm.
And so like it wasn't until I looked into all that when I really thought, maybe I should look into the Palestine thing. But I feel like a lot of people who watch it have been so desensitized to it that they got so fed. Oh, well, I already know what happened. Don't talk to me about it because it blew up online for so long. I just don't even want to hear it. But when
Hmm.
you really start to look into how far this goes, it's just kind of like, man, I feel almost like not guilty, but sort of,
Hmm.
that I'd been so busy because like a lot of us are conditioned to just keep working every single day. We're just trying to make it on our day to day. Then we
Hmm.
don't realize how important it is to know what's happening around the world because just like it's almost like when you're in elementary school and you see a kid get bullied, as long as it's not you, right? You're just going to
Hmm.
mind your own business.
Pretty much,
But
yeah.
what happens when the bully comes and bullies you? All of a sudden you're like, dang, I really should have cared. I'm not trying to say that this is what will happen, but we'd want to hope that we speak up about the Palestinian people because
Hmm.
should anything ever happen to us and come to our door, we'd
Hmm.
want someone to speak out and fight for us, right?
Yeah. And like obviously, we are just scratching the surface right now. We're gonna be talking about it more later on, and it just gets worse from here, honestly.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not trying to take any sides. There's both sides of each story, and there's a side of each story, and then yeah, it's just very sad how it could have been avoided. Honestly, I always blame the British for this. Honestly, for that, but I'm like, just just like you did like with North and South Korea, like you didn't, you just like separated. Just you could have done a better job. The way they just separated the land is just awful. If you look at a map right now, the way they did it, the original map of Palestine and Israel is it was awful. And yeah, just a lot of bad stuff happened, and obviously on both sides, even like some Palestinians also could have done better in so many things, but
But we will
it's
go
just a sad
into
thing.
more
Yeah.
detail about this. This is just our part one introduction
Part
to
one.
all this. But like, I want you
Yep.
to know, you really enlightened me today.
Mhm.
Like,
Thank
I
you.
I don't know. I didn't know the history between the UK and what they played in the role of the movement, the immigration of all these the Jewish people, right?
Mhm.
And the role they played in the land and the distribution of all that. Like, wow, that all of
Yeah.
that is just like history I didn't even understand.
Mhm.
And the next time we talk, I think it'd be really cool to get into like the IMEC corridor and the oil trades, and ultimately, like what people think led to the war of Israel and Palestine back in what was it in October 7 in
Octo
2020.
Yeah, that's the thing,
It was
Leslie.
2020, correct? Or what when
2022, it happened 2 years ago.
2022,
2
sorry,
years
there
ago.
you go, there
Yeah.
you go.
So, yeah, so we that's the thing is that, we have to slowly get to that because there's a whole history, like, between
Yeah,
1948. Like, there was I don't know if you know about the Seven-Day War or something, where
yes, I heard
all
about it, yes.
the Arab countries attacked Israel, and how, like, Israel took a huge part of Egypt and gave it back. There's just so many so you didn't
Whoa,
know about that?
okay.
Like
Okay, look,
the
I heard about the
Sinai
7-Day
Peninsula?
War, but
You know
I
you
I
know
didn't know the details.
you know about the Sinai Peninsula? I'm like, if you look at the map of the Middle East, I really encourage you to look at it actually right now.
I
If you type the
will,
Sinai
I will in
Peninsula,
prep for our next podcast. Wow,
yeah.
you really intrigued me on
So,
this.
like,
Okay.
they used to belong to Israel because they took over, and they had to
Wow,
give it back
okay.
to Egypt for peace. There's just so much that has happened. So, like, obviously, when I get to that part, back to 2022, October 7th, but I kind of want our listeners to, or our viewers to really understand the history of, like, what led to all of this, because people don't really understand the story. People see what's happening in Gaza, the sad part is to Gaza, but there's also a lot of self-defense, and again, a lot of self-defense that Israel is doing too. But you just have to look at the whole story to understand, and, like, really what happened, really what led to this. And I'm really
So, Jean,
excited
I have
to
a I have a
dive into this.
question
Hmm.
just to give our listeners time to digest, right?
Hmm.
What would you encourage them to look up right now for themselves to try to understand this a little better?
So the history, obviously, we briefly struck the surface of what really happened between what the UK, when they're trying to pretty much, they own half of the world pretty much and decided who gets what. And it made that decision of like with Palestine. It was backed by the UN, by the way, the United Nations. I just want to make
Oh,
sure
of
everybody knows
course.
that.
Yep.
It was backed
Hmm.
by the UN. The UN also was like, oh yeah, let's give that to Israel because of everything that happened with Nazi Germany and stuff. So I kind of want people to really know the history of what led to this, and then like look into what happened between 1948 and pretty much the 1990s or even 2000
So
and
the 7 Day
2006.
War, look into the 7 Day War and all
So
that
we look
stuff.
into
Okay.
that. What happened? It was a very brutal war. It happened really quickly. Obviously, the U.S. pretty much the only reason why Israel is still to exist to this day because of the United States. And did you hear?
Wow. Yeah.
Did you hear? And that's a theory that John F. Kennedy was killed because he didn't want Israel to have the atomic bomb. I
Yeah,
don't know if you
he
heard
wanted
that.
to dismantle what they called the secret nuclear program that they had going on, right? To this
And
day, they
so
still negate they have one, by the way, even though it's
no,
pretty
they
clear
do.
they
They
do.
do. They
Yes.
they are one of the countries we have, and they are the only country in the Middle East with the atomic bomb. That is
Yep.
just
But
insane.
they still
So.
negate it.
Hmm.
They still try to, but you just
Hmm.
look into it and it's just there is
Yeah.
no negating it anymore that they
Yeah.
have a nuclear program. Okay.
100%.
So I just want to make that very clear because this is where it's
Hmm.
kind of like crossing over into like
Yeah.
the people who were visiting Jeffrey Epstein and the stuff that they were involved in. And like it's kind of like what was his name? I'm trying to remember the name of the prime minister. I keep thinking Ehud Barak, but I don't think that's him, right? It's like there's some other prime minister. But
Yeah.
anyways, for the Epstein stuff, I highly encourage you guys to look into Leslie Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein managing his finances and how this is how these people work. They never take the fall. And you know how Les Wexner got away with trafficking all these people with Abercrombie and Fitch is
Mhm.
that they basically he handed over he had a signed document that handed over all of his finances to Jeff Epstein. So when they did find out that there was trafficking going on in Abercrombie and Fitch, he's like, "Well, I didn't know. I didn't sign off on any of that. I trusted Epstein to do it all for me, so he didn't get in trouble."
Mhm.
He literally got away with it, basically, right? So I would encourage you guys to look into human trafficking, the relation with Leslie Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein. I highly encourage you guys to look into. I know that they released like emails recently as well, right? A bunch of emails,
Mhm.
but all of this stuff's alleged, right? I want you to look into how many times Bill Clinton, had visited Epstein Island and sort of make the connections between what bills he was passing during that time. Follow the money, guys. Follow the money, okay? Because a lot of the times when you see these people who had visited the island, it's not to say that they all were involved in trafficking of minors, but that's just to say that there could be a connection between politicians and what was going on during that time. So
Mhm.
I would highly encourage you guys to look into that, just in preparation of the next podcast. So anything else you want to add on, Christian?
No, I'm really looking forward to our next episode about this, and then I know it's a lot to take on, but this is why I wanted to be part of this. I'm very excited.
You did awesome, by the way, and I'm like
Thank you.
really excited because they're like, yeah, you're the first person to most things. So, and
Oh
I am
wow,
excited for
I'm
the
very proud.
future one. You'll go into more details as
Yeah.
to like you went over like the early history,
Hmm.
kind of what led with the issues between Israel and Palestine,
Hmm.
and so we're going to go more into the more recent events, what led up to those the next time, and then for me, I'm gonna try to go into more detail between what are the exact connections between Diddy. And I'm gonna go more
Hmm.
into details on Diddy and Epstein, sort of the main people involved between Epstein and Diddy because they did both. Believe it or not, like there was people that were kind of interrelated. And I sort of kind of want to go into what policies were being passed during those times in the Middle East because believe it or not, that matters a lot.
Hmm.
So we can go more into those details the next podcast episode. But I want to thank you so much, Jean Christian, for being part of my podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Leslie.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.